In this episode of Positive Talks, Jade gets to speak to Dr Ammo Raju about his career and about how he has progressed and dealt with mental health difficulties throughout his life. I get to speak to a real live occupational therapist about hot topics to her and her team. Jade, meanwhile, has been reading a book written by Dr Ammo Raju. She reviews this and continues her conversation with him. You will not want to miss this episode of Positive Talks. Get yourself a drink, make yourself comfy, and welcome to Positive Talks. Yes, welcome to another episode of Positive Talks. Good to have you joining us. We are continuing to get a lot of comments from you on social media and so on. If you look down below, you will see the link. Please do contact us via Twitter, via Facebook. You will be able to email us. The details are down below, and of course, if you like what you hear, subscribe, hit that bell. It's good to have you with us. So one of the comments we've had from a number of OTs is, why on earth do your episodes not come out at regular intervals? Well, the answer is really simple. Jade and myself are very, very passionate about occupational therapy, but that is the reason for the podcast. We don't get paid for it. There is no income stream. We have to fit this in around our other commitments. And as part of that, Jade has been heavily involved, as you know, with Rise for Disability. Details of those events should be on the screen below for you to see. I work, my organisation is Arms Rehab Limited. We do a lot of training around the country, and we've been particularly busy over the summer. In fact, we may well have worked with you. You know who you are, so good to see you. So we fit this in because we're passionate about occupational therapy, just like you are. So we apologise. Thank you for bearing with us. We know the release dates aren't as even as we'd like them to be, but thank you for joining us. So on the episode that we have today, it's a little bit different. Jade and I have been busy doing our own separate thing a little bit. Jade has had the opportunity to work with a gentleman called Dr Ammo Raju. Now, Dr Ammo, as he likes to be known, is the chief executive of an organisation, and he has written a book based on his own experiences. In fact, it's been so interesting that we've decided to devote most of this episode to Jade's interview with him, and indeed to feature his book as our Book Beats review today. However, not to be outdone, I came across a very interesting group of people that I was doing some training with prior to the making of this episode, and one of those people very much wanted to be involved in the hot topics that we're discussing. So find out what is actually going on out in the real world with an occupational therapist who is working out in the real world. Stay tuned and see. As ever, we are still looking to follow the topics that you've got. We are developing things in the pipeline, and of course we will have our live Positive Talks podcasts as well that are being filmed at the Rise for Disability Roadshow, is the first one being, of course, in September. Details again below the screen. So any comments you wish to make, please make those comments. Hit that bell. The social media, again, we'd love to be a lot more involved with that. We will get more involved with that. Keep your comments coming. You can find us on Facebook. But for now, sit back, relax, watch if you're on YouTube, listen if you've got us in your ears, and let me introduce you to Jade and what she has to say with Dr Ammo Raju.
Hi Moo, thanks for joining us on Positive Talks. I've been reading Walk Like a Man. So this is a new feature for Positive Talks where we talk about what books are available to read and that may be of interest. So tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
My name's Ammo Raju. I'm a disabled person with diplegia affecting the right side of my body. I'm ambulant, but I walk with what was described by a consultant once as an awkward gait. and I've kept that description going for a while now. I don't know if it's run its course, but yeah. So I'm in my 50s now, and for the last 30 years, I've been running a charity which has become a very successful charity in the Midlands called Disability Direct, which does a number of wonderful projects. I won't even try and list them all because I don't remember the vast majority of them. That's just my old age more than anything. But yeah, it's a set of support services for disabled people. I'm also, as you've described, as an author. I'm an ex-counsellor. I'm an ex-Bhangra singer with a couple of recording contracts behind me. And I'm a father. I'm a grandfather, husband, and I only a few days ago announced me stepping down as CEO of the charity, and that's mainly so I can start to do other things on a more of a national level. I'm getting pulled in a lot of directions because of my raised profile now, to talk about disability and improve access to support services and anything for the lives of disabled people. So that's one of the reasons I decided to step down and spend more time doing stuff nationally.
There is a lot. When I was doing some research on yourself and from our conversations, is that I don't think there's anything you haven't really done within the disabilities. So yeah, I think we're doing like a whole recording just from that side of it. But we're here to talk about your book, but we will obviously talk about your experiences and a couple of other things as well. So, Walk Like a Man, where did the title come from? Firstly?
So the title, Walk Like a Man, as I said, I've got an ambulant disability. And when we had, probably myself and the co-author Manny, when we were, I would say 3/4 of the way through the book, we decided that we need to give the book a name. We hadn't actually got that far, and that's when there were a number of suggestions, but the one that really stuck with me was a conversation. And as you've gathered already, that the book is based on the challenges faced by disabled people, but also disabled people with mental health issues.
Yep.
And I remember walking past an elderly gentleman one day who didn't see a disability. He just saw this man not walking the way he thought he should be walking. So he said, stand up tall, come on, straighten your back, walk like a man. And that stuck with me for a while. It made me laugh in that he didn't recognize that I was a disabled person. He just thought I may have been ex-military or something, that something just sparked inside him for him to feel confident enough to say that to me. And I didn't
It's
even
always
bother.
the elderly people have the most confidence to say things that
Yeah,
sometimes are not so much
yeah,
PC or correct, but
and
they
because
can be funny.
I was brought up never to argue with older people. I just to show them the love and respect that they deserve, and so I giggled and walked it off. But it stuck. The conversation stuck with me, and as we were choosing the title, I thought that is the perfect title because it fits my life on so many levels.
What made you write the book? Why did you start writing the book?
Well, as you just said earlier, that I've done a lot of things in my life, and many people had said to me over the years, and I didn't pay them much attention, if I'm honest with you, that they go, as a disabled person, you have done more in your life than most non-disabled people ever dream of doing.
Yeah.
And I found that strange. But when I started charting my journey, I thought, okay, well, all right, I've been a singer with a record contract as a disabled person. I've worked my way up with no qualifications to the highest level within my company. I've become a well-known local entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and then I became a politician for my sins, and um, now and I started thinking about writing a book, and I thought, well let's capture all this, because a lot of people said that my story would inspire other people. What a lot of people didn't know was that I was secretly battling depression for 30 years. And that only came out when I decided that I was going to write the book. And I thought, well, I better sit my family down and tell them that I've had depression and I've been seeing a therapist.
So is that the first time they knew when you said about
Yeah.
writing the book? Oh wow, okay.
Honestly, God, I used to disappear every now and then. My wife didn't know where I was going.
I bet
But
she was
most,
relieved when she spoke to her.
yeah, well, most of the time I had my sessions during the day, and she probably assumed I was at work.
Yeah,
And my children who are grown up now, they didn't know. My family, my parents and siblings didn't know. Nobody knew. It was just as a man, the testosterone levels would I could feel them flying out the window if I ever thought of even mentioning it to anybody that I was having therapy. So I kept it to myself. But as I thought, well, if I'm going to write a book based on my experiences as a disabled person, then mental health has to be part of that story.
yeah,
And so that's what I decided to open up and tell everyone. And then the initial reaction was, I think people didn't believe me when I
yeah,
told them I've been having therapy. They go, "You therapy? You're confident. You don't need therapy." Um, but I said one of the things I say in the book is that it's normally the loudest ones
yeah,
in the room that need therapy.
yeah.
Um,
When reading the book, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but from me reading the book, is that you learn a lot about your upbringing and culture and stuff as well. So you talk about your relationship with your father and obviously about opening up and emotions and stuff with that. And I think that's something that is quite prevalent to a lot of men where generations back it's not acceptable. So maybe obviously from thinking that's the reason why you'd maybe not be open with your family about having therapy and stuff. But I suppose as we get as generations go on and we talk more about it, it becomes more of a acceptable thing, if that makes sense. So
you're spot on, Jade, because the thing there is I'm the eldest son within the house, the eldest child, and it's certainly in the South Asian culture, the eldest child is expected to take on some of the burden
yeah,
from the father and deal with all family issues and work related issues and be the next generation provider. And showing signs of weakness is just not an option.
yeah,
So a lot of times I've noted that since my book has been published, a lot of people have forward, and whether it's women or men, they've all said one thing, that it's the eldest child that they know that seems to be more. It seems to be happening more in terms of the ranking of the siblings, whether it's the older child normally has
yeah.
that.
Since writing the book, how has that impacted your life?
My life changed overnight. I was well known in the city of Derby where I live because of my day job and because of my previous political career. But one thing that um, kind of helped, well, helped's probably the wrong word, but uh, one factor which assisted with this rise in profile was when lockdown happened, we wrote the book, and it gave us the time and space to do that. As we came out of lockdown, um, I found the world to be a more vibrant place. Everybody wanted to suddenly mix and talk with each other, and you could
Yeah.
see people were locked up, and so when the book came out, and we were coming out of lockdown, and before we realized it, we there was an interested audience on a national scale, and overnight the book became an Amazon bestseller, which
When did
was
it get released? What date was it? I did look it up, but
it was November 21, November
so it was
2020.
still within that kind of COVID on and off period where it
Yeah,
was like you're free, now you're not, you're free
no,
sort
yeah,
of situation. So I
yeah. There
think
was that. I
yeah.
remember I did a book launch, and there were people in the audience with masks on. So yeah, you're right. It was still in that era.
But I think
Uh,
that that timing is knowing that a lot of people where there was such isolation, but also there was isolation from not being able to go and speak to people. I don't know if this is your own experiences that I think that people realize the value in human connection and speaking to people. So there was
yeah,
more telephone conversations and virtual meetings and things like that. So your book, I can imagine, would have been really comforting to some people, and especially people within the disability community, because they were amongst some of the most obviously isolated during COVID because of,
absolutely. Yeah, and what happened, as I say, that it became an overnight success, and within I'd say 2 to 3 months, I started getting emails and messages through social media from people who I'd never met, didn't know who they were, from all over the country, saying, I've just read your book, and I can relate to it personally, or this is the story of my brother or my sister or whatever. They're what you've talked about is exactly what they're going through. But the scary thing, Jade, was that there was a whole new generation of disabled people in their late teens, up to the age of late 30s, um, who had said that, well, what I was going through in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they were going through now, if not worse.
Yeah.
And that really kind of worried me, that
Yeah.
parts of society has moved on, but when it comes to the stigma and
Yeah.
the awareness of disability and how it affects the individual physically and mentally, we are still in a medieval era to
And
some
some
extent.
of our previous, so some of the interviews we've done, so Mike, my co-host on this show, he interviewed I can't remember his name, a guy with cerebral palsy that's had the same occupational therapist and support network from a child to an adult. And for him, having that upbringing to tackle, so he has a very positive perception of life and abilities and stuff like that. And actually, kind of what's going on with social media and this kind of merge between both, he was far more mentally positive and proactive from being a child in the 70s, having that support network and that's overcoming like obstacles compared to maybe what somebody would be like nowadays as well. Because I think there's benefit in speaking about things and having this connection and network with people, but then you also have you open it up to negative comments and perceptions, and it's still a very ableist world that we live in, unfortunately. So
It is, and a couple of the repetitive um, shared experiences that I was getting from people who have read the book was the issue of staring. There's a lot of staring in for disabled people. That when they're walking down the road, or when they're in supermarkets or restaurants, the rest of society feel it's okay to stare at them. There was that was coming through, but there was also this issue around people trying to pigeonhole disabled people
yeah,
and saying
and I
you
got
should
that
do
from
this.
your book as well, where
Yeah,
you said things like suggestions of things like, oh, you should do this because you have a
yeah,
disability and stuff like that. And I do understand, but somebody, I suppose, with lived experience saying that because they can see a business or a revenue stream from it as advice, that's fair enough. But having somebody that's maybe non-disabled just pigeonholing you into that section
yeah.
is where it becomes a bit, no, actually, people can do whatever they feel they can do with it's society, I suppose, rather
But
than
yeah, as in my case, on numerous occasions throughout the book, as people will read, is that often those suggestions were made uh, to 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 make the prescriber feel more good about themselves rather than myself.
yeah,
It was them, whether it was a social worker or whether it was, a family friend or whatever. It was, well, you should do that because then you're less of a burden on us. That's really what
yeah,
a lot of disabled people shared that kind of viewpoint experience.
sure.
Quite worried, but yeah. So
Maybe,
that's
sorry.
what the book has done is it started a conversation, and here we are 3 years later. Nearly, it's been nearly 3 years since the book's been published, and we're in this scenario where people are still. I'm still selling books galore. Wherever I do a keynote speech, I end up selling 20, 30 books without
Wow.
trying. But
Yeah.
people are definitely interested in talking
I think that
about.
the style that it's written as well, from myself, like it genuinely, I can get why people have reached out to speak to you because your personality does shine through it, and it's almost like you get to learn and know you as well in the style that it's written. It's almost like you're not really reading, you're watching a series or a film. I know that sounds a bit weird, but
Yeah.
that's how it feels like when I've been listening to it, sort of thing. It's
So a number of people have said that. I've just had a conversation with a potential film producer as well,
I was
who's
gonna ask that question. I was
yeah.
gonna like, is it gonna be made into a series? But
It's it's been suggested, and so we're in initial conversations, as we say. But the one of the things that when I first thought about writing the book, I didn't want to write a biography a biography. I've read biographies before, and whilst that person may be a fascinating individual, I find them a little bit boring sometimes. I did this, and then that happened, and then this and this happened, and then he said this and she said that, and I just find I'd start to switch off after a while.
Yeah.
I needed to create a character who was based on me and had my personality, including all my flaws, and I have flaws. Somebody was wrote a book review on it, and I can't remember where they wrote it, but they were thankful that I was honest that CEOs can be idiots as well, because we have a strong belief of a level of self-confidence that we sometimes don't realize
I
that we
think
are
that can be quite
flawed characters.
damaging sometimes,
Yeah.
like from my own experiences, because I'm a CEO as well with a disability. It's almost like I like the fact that you're opening up that information and giving that raw information, because people have this perception that you've got to be perfect and you'll do this, this, and this, but we're all on a learning journey and we all have our own battles as well. So, yeah, I think that's great.
So that was the first part of Jade's interview with Dr. Ammo, and as you can see, he's a very interesting man with lots to say and lots to share. We're going to pick up with that interview a little bit later on, but in the meantime, I've been out and about in the real world, and I met up with an occupational therapist when I was doing some training just a few days ago. She wanted to be part of the Hot Topics discussion, so without further ado, let's head into Hot Topics, this time not just with me, but with a live occupational therapist as well. Yes, welcome. So we are talking again about hot topics, the things that are relevant to the occupational therapy community. But this time, you notice, I don't have Jade with me. Jade is not here. We've kicked her out. We're not interested. We have a proper, real-life occupational therapist. And this young lady is based in the wonderful county of Northamptonshire. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and explain a bit about who she is. So who are you and what do you do?
Well, Mike, my name's Alison MacDonald and I currently manage a team of specialist moving and handling assessors and occupational therapists in West Northants Council.
Well, hang on a minute, I've got to challenge you on that, because we all know every occupational therapist from the minute they qualify are moving and handling assessors.
Well, now there's the question. What makes you an assessor and what makes you a trainer?
Oh, hang on a minute though, don't we train anyway? Because if you've got staff, we often asked to give advice, and when we have a patient or client, we end up training the carers, don't we, the family?
Indeed, but I think the difference, we predominantly work within the community, and I think the difference is that it is a specialism as far as we are concerned, and we have done higher levels of training than maybe our standard mandatory training, which then puts us in a much better perspective of giving that experience and that knowledge.
It's a good point that you raised. It is a specialism. And
Yes.
It's a bit like, I remember, and I qualified years ago, I qualified with a DIPCOT back in 1991, okay? And we were told you're now qualified to work within mental health, physical health and learning disabilities. And as a naive, very young OT, I thought that was true, and it's not.
Absolutely not, no.
So moving and handling in itself is a specialism.
Absolutely. I know that my forte is not working in paediatrics. Whilst I understand the moving and handling within that element, it's not something that I've had a lot of experience with. Acquired brain injury, not so much my bag, but my experience started within older adults, but I've also worked and done sort of rotations in hand therapy. Did 6 months of that, but if you ask me now to go in and create splints and things, I'm not sure that it would be particularly great.
Yeah.
You know, but also one of the areas that I worked in a lot was respiratory and physiology and infectious diseases, and actually that's quite interesting in itself, because you've got people that might not necessarily have any mobility issues per se, but their ability and levels of function are severely impacted by their condition. And just because somebody can mobilise from A to B doesn't mean to say they're, if you like, any better off than somebody that does not have that level of mobility.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Which is a really good point. I've had some very, very difficult conversations with either student OTs that I've worked with where you would see patient A walk down the corridor one day looking okay, and sadly the following day they're no longer there because of that level of the impact of that respiratory illness, that COPD.
That's really interesting, because the Royal College of OTs is in constant dialogue now with the government, and have been for years, by the way, to make that point. They've been doing it for years. But to try and push the role of what occupational therapy really is, because I think, don't shoot me for this, guys, but I think a lot of people who don't understand occupational therapy think it's all about equipment and adaptations, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely not part of it. You know, that's the big picture and the global picture, if you like. But when you hone in, it's all about that individual. That's exactly what OT is about.
We're talking about
understanding that individual person and making sure that you are tailoring that client-centred intervention with that individual to be able to get the best for them.
Okay, we're talking about the individual. As an individual, what is hot at the moment in Northamptonshire? What sort of things are making you and your team sort of either rant or enthused about?
I think from our perspective, and it's been fairly hot for a while now, as I said, we are known as a specialist moving and handling team. And as we know, and without trying to get too political, we all know that everywhere that you work, you are looking at savings.
Yeah, there's a finite amount of money.
Finite amount of money. But we have to make sure that, again, as therapists, we put the person at the centre of all that we do. But equally, part of what we do as specialists moving and handling is looking at that equipment, looking at those up-to-date things that we could use to support that individual, and also support the carers that provide that level of support for those individuals. And with our knowledge and expertise and training, look at how we could potentially consider whether the length of time is required for those calls. Could that care plan be written in a slightly different way, making sure that we maybe provide advice around medications being given as that first thing that you do when you go in, so that levels of pain are managed more appropriately when that moving and handling needs to happen. Looking and doing those risk assessments. Is it okay that you manage a mow lift with one person, mow lift and belt, whatever it might be? Controversially, people might say that you cannot use a mobile hoist with one person. Question.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if I think back to when I used to work in social services, they reckon about 40% of the referrals were for occupational therapy, but we only had about 10% of the workforce. And we were always involved in, it was almost like people working in silos.
Yes.
Because we might argue some equipment would work, but if it wasn't standard stock and it cost more money, it just went to the social care budget and the care package, and we just put in more carers, and it never seemed to get lined up and aligned.
Yeah.
So is that an issue that you've come across about budgets?
Well, I think the very interesting thing, apart from the fact that we will look if there could be a reduction in that package of care, could we do it with one person? So that single care approach would always be adopted as appropriate and with the individual in mind. Now, it may be that actually you go in to see Flo and she might need two carers because actually that movement on the bed could not be met with one. But do they both need to be there for an hour? You know, it may be that then the person's having breakfast, because some of those tasks they don't need two people to do that.
Mm.
And it's been quite inventive with the care. It might be that actually in the morning for personal care you do need two people, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need two carers for the other three calls.
Yes, but what you get, of course, and this is the thing, is that you're there as a trained professional. You do your risk assessment. But under the Health and Safety at Work Act, it talks about the employer having to do their risk assessment, and the employer is going to be an independent care provider, not necessarily you. And a lot of them will have a policy that will state it's two carers whenever we use equipment.
Indeed, and that's one of the areas that we're working on quite closely with any of our care providers that are part of are used within the council. So they're part of our provider services.
Right.
And we work with them around that. So as a team, we're very proactive in having our own training that we have devised and we have set up, that we can support those care agencies to understand the equipment that they're using. We set up some sessions that they can come in with us and work with us, and we can then support them. So it doesn't necessarily have to happen at that critical care call when you've got that person there, and we turn up at 7 a.m. to do that care call, and we're busy there trying to show them how to use stuff, and that's fine, but we're also very aware that they've got half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever it is to do that call, and then they've got to go off to the next one and not always have enough time to do it. And what we want to do is to bring the management side of those care agencies into the mix to understand exactly what we within the council and us as a specialist moving and handling team are all about.
Although you're clearly doing a good job, what you're doing is very different, because a lot of social care OTs won't touch training with staff, with care agencies at all. Their attitude is very much one that says it is up to the care provider to provide their training. They don't get involved in doing the training. So that's quite an innovative way of doing it.
It is, because they also do have their own training, but it's also very important that if they are working and ultimately, I guess, being paid by the council to provide that care for those council-funded packages of care, then they also need to look at working within some of the remits under which we work. And whilst you have to have that pragmatic approach about how much it costs with how much care goes in, you know, there are times actually we will go in and say, actually, we think you need a little bit longer, or you need that second person. You know, it works both ways, that they might be working with somebody that it's actually stretching them because maybe the person has a long-term health condition and they're declining, but without the knowledge and expertise, they've not sourced that help that they need. And actually, I do feel that those that are doing those Care Act assessments have a much greater understanding, because in recent years I feel that we as OTs and therapists within the council are much more of a listened and heard voice.
I mean, that's really encouraging to hear. I'm interested to know, maybe your service does the same. Why don't you contact us on the socials? It should be scrolling across your screen. If you like what you hear, by the way, you want to hear more comments like this, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that button. I'm sure it's ringing somewhere. But to come back to what you're saying, and going back to what I remember, 40% of referrals, 10% of the budget. I'm a little bit reluctant to ask you this, because I know that you are an employee of an organisation. I don't mean to do anything that jeopardises that. But do you feel that occupational therapy is valued as much as it could be? Not just internally, but do you think the people you work with, the citizens or the clients, the customers, that they value it?
I do, but I always think there's room for improvement. I think you know, you will never ever get away from the fact that you'll go and you're going to do an OT assessment, or you know, within my team, we're not all occupational therapists, We have moving and handling assessors who are, and this sounds detrimental, but it really is not meant like that, unqualified in that sense of the word. They're not occupational therapists, but they are extremely skilled at moving and handling. But you'll go in and you'll do those initial assessments and look at those issues, and they'll still think you're a physio. And you know, I've had that all through my career, and you know, we've all experienced that where are you the physio? No. Or you've worked in the hospitals and you know, no, we're the ones with the green trousers. We've all had those conversations, and actually, I do remember I was a mature student when I trained, and I remember that there were youngsters, shall we say, that had started the OT degree that in the first term equally were not sure what OTs did.
That's a bit scary, particularly the financial implications of that course.
Indeed, and it's that understanding of actually knowing, and I think if you actually said, what does an OT do, we could sit here and have a 6-hour, 7-hour discussion.
We could. So what do you think we can do then? What can we do in order to make people understand occupational therapy? I've got an idea. I've got it, right? We've got a hotline to government. We have a new government in place. Labour's taken over. And Lady Starmer, wife of Sir Keir, in some newspapers has been reported as being an occupational therapist. Now, Lady Starmer, if you're watching this and you want to hit the button and contact us, come in, that's great. However, I've done a bit of digging, you know. I went onto the HCPC register.
Don't tell me.
I looked her up.
She's not an OT.
Well, she's not on the register. So she's either practising in an unlicensed way, or because she's from an...
Controversial there,
allegedly, or she's actually occupational health.
I was just going to say, this is the other arm where we're never an occupational therapist. We're either occupational health or physio.
So here we go. How on earth do we make the public understand, make government understand what occupational therapy is? Any ideas?
Oh gosh, now you are putting me on the spot. Now.
I am indeed putting you on the spot, but it's a hot topic for me as well, because I'll be quite honest with you. I was, and we are planning on getting him on the podcast to have an interview with him. He has agreed to it. But we have a chief exec who's been in post now for 3 years at the Royal College of OTs. But throughout my professional career, I've heard of things like social prescribing. I've heard of things about the ageing population and the interventions there.
Indeed.
And I never hear of occupational therapy being involved. In fact, I even saw something on the news about some virtual reality headset being used, purpose for occupation, to get people physically rehabilitated. It was physios leading it.
Yeah.
So my bugbear is that I think we should be a lot more prominent publicly. Now, I'm just curious, is that the role of our professional body, or should it be us? Should it be a combination of us and the professional body? What do we do? Where do we go?
Well, I think it has to be a joint thing, because we're the ones that are doing it.
Right.
And whilst I appreciate that we have those that are part of the professional body, we're the ones on the floor. We're the ones on the ground doing that work. And unless we are either going through our cot and advising them or giving them suggestions, then we're going back to the elections and so forth, you know, and everything else. If you don't vote, don't moan about who goes into power. You know, if you're not proactive yourself and you don't see any change.
So we should all be a lot more active in our professional body and being involved there.
Are we okay to say it's not working when we've actually not really put much effort in ourselves?
It's a valid point. And I guess the other thing is, it's working at that local level, isn't it? It's making the contacts with people locally.
Absolutely.
It could even be, and I don't know how people feel, is maybe phoning up occasionally, phoning up those talking shows and saying, hi, I'm an occupational therapist, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And even that might get us in somewhere. So
agreed.
It's definitely us lot that needs to be a lot more active.
I think so. And I think even along the lines of on a fairly low level, that particularly with people that we work with, which albeit are across a wide age range, but working in moving and handling, it's people that have got levels of reduced mobility in some way, shape or form that we are going out and assessing. And often those people will have some long-term health conditions as opposed to just old age frailty, for want of a better word. So they're going to be fairly heavily linked up to their GPs. Now, that's one of the areas where maybe, and this is just me thinking off the top of my head, you putting me on the spot, but actually, if you walked into a GP surgery and said, what do the occupational therapists in your area do? What do the physios do? You know, what do the district nurses do? Those that are based out of their surgeries, they'll probably have a reasonable idea, one would hope. But, you know, there are doctor surgeries that have occupational therapists working within them.
Yeah.
But would it be better? I'm sure, you know, if you know of any OTs that work within GP practices, how do they work?
Well, why don't we ask folks? Why don't you contact us, email us, contact us on Facebook, go onto X, put comments down below. Do you work in a GP practice? And there has been research done. When it was the college,
I think it's one of
therapists.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the areas that could be tapped into potentially a little bit more, because they're the link.
Yeah. And one of the brilliant things that the Royal College of OTs is doing is it's trying to get a database together so that in future, a bit like the Cochrane Library, if you know what the Cochrane Library is, folks, then what that is you can go in and just say, okay, where's the research on GP-led occupational therapy interventions? Where's the research on OTs being involved in moving and handling? And I think that's going to be a growing body of evidence that's going to work, which is an excellent idea. But is there anything else that you really want to mention that's getting to all your colleagues at the moment, either positive or negative within the OT world in general?
I think for me the positive is that actually the council that I work for, I feel is really making great strides in working much closer with the therapists.
Right. You can name the council if you want to. I don't know if you get a bonus, but you can mention them if you want to.
Whether I should.
The whole idea is that we're trying to big up what's working well around the country.
Yeah,
so we can all
and I would say
together.
West Northants Council.
That's West Northants Council, by the way, just so you know.
We have an excellent service manager who's quite innovative in thinking, and, you know, all of us, no idea is a bad idea. Not all things can be put into place, but we're able to have those open conversations, and that makes a massive difference to the service.
Okay.
And we also have a lot of services within our council as well. So it's not just around, obviously I work for the specialist moving and handling team, but we also have our area of reablement therapists that work within our service. We also have the people that do more of the major adaptations and the disabled facilities grants, etc. So we've always got other people and our colleagues that we can tap into, because everything can be a little bit different. We also have a fantastic assistive technology team that work within West Northants, and they're fantastic. And again, it's not prescriptive. It's looking at the individual. What can we do to support that person with assistive technology? It's always the go-to to look at what the solutions are. And it's also our first year for having one of our moving and handling assessors that's just started his OT apprenticeship as well.
That's brilliant, because I think having apprenticeships to get in is so much better, because there's the in-house value, isn't there? But you mentioned assistive technology. One of our previous podcasts, you might remember, we featured Adapt IT, who are based in Tewkesbury, who cover the whole of the country, and they look at all sorts of stuff, including accessibility for gaming, because what we forget, well, not as OTs, but people in general forget, it isn't just about work, it isn't just about sensors and false alarms, it's also about enabling people to live fulfilling lives and things that are relevant to them, isn't it? Purposeful.
Absolutely, and it's one of the classic examples that our assistive technology guru comes up with when he has talks with us is about a lady that has MS, and that just by the use of using things like Alexa or Google and lots of wireless stuff, instead of waiting for a carer to hold the phone for her, to ring her daughter once a week, she was able to turn the television on and off independently, close the curtains, ring her family whenever she chose, and albeit that she couldn't get out of bed and physically do those day-to-day tasks that she'd like to, it gave her a sense of self.
Yeah. And by the sounds of it, we will be meeting again. I think between the two of us, there's a few things we could probably rattle on about. But in the nicest possible way, and it's been an absolute pleasure you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much.
If you guys want to comment on anything we've discussed, please do so. You know the social medias, it's all rolling on the screen down below. Hit the button, subscribe. And with that, we're going back on to the next feature. Thank you. It's great having hot topics with Jade, but it's even better when we talk with you guys as well. And we'll see what hot topics get discussed in the coming months. Maybe it'll have something to do with the Euros that have occurred. I don't know if you noticed, there was a team called England who played, and they came second. Unfortunately, you only get a trophy if you come first. But what you might not be aware of is that there's been the World Cup going on for over 75s. And for walking football as well. Perhaps that's something to focus on when you look at social prescribing and where OT fits into it. You may well want to talk about some of the things that have happened recently. I was very fortunate, along with my daughter, to do a presentation at DFG Foundations and their recent talk in Birmingham. Look at children's disabled facilities grants. Lots of innovative work going on there, and maybe that's something we can talk about as well. It really is about you guys, so please do make sure that you contact us with the issues that are important to you. I know that we've got other occupational therapists joining us in forthcoming episodes, so I very look forward to meeting with them. Now, meanwhile, as you know, Jade has been talking to Dr Ammo Raju, who has already told us a little bit about his life and where he's progressing. He's done a lot of work within mental health as well, and indeed he started a not-for-profit organisation to support people who are less well privileged as we are here in the UK. We're going to pick up a little bit of the rest of that conversation now with Jade. So, without further ado, let's return to Jade and Dr Ammo as we pick up on their conversation.
So your life's obviously changed quite significantly since your book release. Are you now going to have to do a volume 2 to say about everything that's happened since?
This is that's a good question, and the thing is, since this book published, I've had, and I'm very humbled by it, and I'm not. I've had award after award for suddenly I've been elevated into a higher profile nationally. So I've won 4 or 5, probably 6 awards for my work that I've done over the last 30 years, and I put a lot of that down to the book, that it came out into and put my story into the public domain. And this is one thing I say to people, in that, you know, my story may sound quite lively and inspiring, but everybody, if they started to put their pen to paper and start charting their own journey, they've done things in there, no matter how small they are and or insignificant they may think they are. They have those little things that they've done may have a massive impact on others. So there is a story in everyone, and once people start to know your story, your life changes, and that certainly happened with me with this book, because the book was published in 2019, November 19. By February 22, November 2021. By February 22, I won my first award for outstanding third sector achievement. Then a couple of months later, I was awarded a doctorate for my services to disabled people by the University of Derby. And then I made it onto the Shaw Trust Power 100 list as one of the most influential disabled people.
Yeah.
And then I was awarded an OBE in the King's First Birthday Honours list. And a couple of months after that, I became a deputy to the Lord Lieutenant.
Wow.
And then a couple of months after that, I won the ITV National Diversity Awards.
Yeah.
And then just 2 months ago, I won at the Scope Role Model Awards. And I put a lot of this down to, because I'm not a unique or alone. There are a lot of disabled people out there doing fantastic things.
Yeah.
And they're working under the radar.
Yeah.
My position, the profile has been elevated a lot down to this book.
It's also your determination, and that comes through in the book as well. So I think that from listening to your book and how you explain yourself, I think that you have to give credit. That obviously you wrote your book, and that is a credit to you, but it's also your determination and your will to do more, sort of thing.
There was a chapter that I didn't put in the book, and the chapter was called "Not Resilient, Just Stubborn," and because a lot of people have described me as quite a resilient character, and possibly I am. And determination comes from this thing. You'll have this, as many other disabled people have said as well, that we as disabled people, we're working at 150%. We're constantly in overdrive.
Yeah.
So when we're in overdrive, that comes across as determination. Sometimes it's just it's as if we're on some kind of small dose of heroin that we just want. We've got to keep doing this because we've got to prove something to ourselves at the same time as proving it to the wider society.
And I think that when you stop, certain things become harder as well. I don't know whether it's a distraction or what, but I think, yeah, it's almost like you have to keep on going, otherwise you fall, I suppose. I don't know whether that's like
bang on.
Yeah.
I think a lot of disabled people say this to me as well, that when they sit down and their arms flop and they say, right, I'm knackered, that's when they start to consider their own impairment again.
Yeah.
And they start to consider what's wrong in their life.
Yeah.
So they just keep themselves busy, physically and mentally, just to stay in the rat race and keep themselves out of that zone that drags them back in.
Completely agree with that. So also, obviously, just touching on mental health, within the book, obviously, and your own experiences, like talking about mental health in general, even from my experiences, is a bit of a taboo subject. But without looking at the services that are provided in general for anybody suffering with mental health, actually looking at it as a point from an intersectionality approach. So in the book, obviously, we follow your journey, but can you give, without giving too many spoilers on it, tell us how you've experienced your own journey being disabled and a man, and also Asian as well?
Yeah, and that's three stories in one there, really, isn't it? Because men and mental health, we're not the best at talking about what's on our mind, unless we're talking about football and how bad the score was last night. We don't like talking about what's bothering us, and I say this. And one of the lines I say in the book, without too much of a spoiler, is that women are brilliant in terms of when they get together, whether there's just two women or whether it's a group of women, they can immediately, within seconds, start offloading. Men, they, as I say, unless we're talking about how many beers we drank last night, we don't know what to say to each other. And I always say, why is it that we can't say to each other in a manly way, guess what's peeing me off? And if we had started a conversation like that, it's just, there's still an element of testosterone in the conversation. But
see a lot of emotion in football. Talking about football again, I think that's the main time you see men cry. It's like
yeah, you're right. And then on top of that, a disabled person, disabled people, we have our challenges in life, regardless of what impairment you have. But then, just to add to my troubles, was the fact that I was a disabled person from the South Asian community, where disability is considered a sin from a previous life. I witnessed conversations where, and I think you've probably read that in the
Yeah.
book already, where people were very comfortable in telling me that I've sinned in a previous life as to why I'm suffering this life. And strangely enough, only a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to I won't say what religion they were, but they were some kind of a monk of some sort, and he felt very comfortable in saying, "Oh, you're such a great achiever, but wouldn't have been great if you had not done something wrong in your last life that you would have." I just stared at him with disbelief, and I thought, you know what? I can't be bothered. I'm not
No.
going to take you on because it's thousands of years of religious belief. You're not going to change in one conversation.
But even
So
from that, some people, when we look at history and certain cultures, there's also some people where people that are with disabilities have been treated like they're gods or and things like that as well. And also looking into history, there's although it's been changed a bit again to try and fit, I don't know what people find acceptable, but if you go back in history, it's actually somebody that has found that there's a lot of prevalent people with disabilities in history and they're trying to put them
well,
back
there
in.
are, yeah, Richard III. Well,
Yeah.
people were, disabilities all around us in history, and characters, very famous characters in history, had depression. Abraham Lincoln, Einstein, Winston Churchill. These are people who are in the history books forever. And
Yeah.
what's lesser known about them is that they were all uh, battling with depression.
I think that my own experiences, and I don't know if you agree with this yourself, is that there is a massive importance of relatability when talking to somebody around your own experiences and stuff, especially within disability. There's a lack of services with an understanding of disability and mental health in itself. And when we were just talking obviously about intersectionality as well, that as well as and how these can have fundamental factors on mental health. So having a disability, there is potential there is obviously some people that have low mood and mental health because of symptoms of the disability, but then you've also got isolation, obviously comments and uh, bullying, etc. Loads of things that can be factored on it, but also as a symptom itself. So from my own experiences, being neurodiverse, gone a long time without being diagnosed as being neurodiverse, but constantly having mental health issues, but not really understanding why and how that is a symptom of it. So for me, understanding myself, my symptoms, having self-awareness, and also even acceptance has helped me massively. But I still feel that there is a massive way to go with mental health services and that understanding. So for me personally, I'd rather speak to somebody that has knowledge and understanding of ADHD and autism rather than somebody that hasn't. And it seems quite hard to find them services. Whereas within the book, it seems that you've had a reasonably positive experience with therapy, and yeah, that's
I think, yeah, it's important that you get the right therapist, because it's not just a simple thing that you can buy an off the shelf session somewhere and everything will be fine. Um, a good therapist is somebody who doesn't advise you, and they're just there to listen, and you're just they're a sounding board more than anything. And they can steer conversations, can't they? But they can't tell you what you should be doing, because one of the misconceptions of people new to therapy is that they're going to go in there and they're going to get the answers to their problems,
yeah,
or coping strategies. And that's not therapy.
no,
Therapy is just the ability to say, this is what's on my mind, and no one's listening and nobody's understanding where I'm coming from.
yeah,
And often, as in my case, most of the answers to my issues came outside the therapy room. They came from interactions with people at public who had no issue or interest in my disability. They were
yeah,
just talking to me as a person, and just conversations with them. And I won't give the spoiler as to who they were, but there was three key individuals in the book. And if you've probably reached you're probably coming up to where you've told me where you've got to the book. You're probably coming up to the second person soon. And my my belief strongly is that there are um, a lot of people have the answer to their troubles inside them. It's just that we just need someone to steer us in the right direction, or give us a little nudge or a poke
Yeah.
to make us remember when we look in the mirror, oh my God, that's what I need to do, or that's why I'm not understanding this.
Yeah.
And
Lack
as
of
in disabled,
confidence, isn't it? I suppose, but and the way where you've been brought up, maybe being told you're less than, not saying family ways brought up, but society and other people, and that you always second guess, I guess, and that's
it is, and as in my case, the need for therapy wasn't because of my disability, my impairment. It was because of the reaction of everyone around me
yeah,
to my impairment. Um, Somebody who has just acquired an impairment, whether it's a road traffic accident or some kind of a new long-term illness that they've got, their need for therapy might be different in terms of processing that new life that they've got to
yeah,
live now. But in my case, for someone who was born with an impairment, the I didn't know any of the life, so I didn't have a comparison.
yeah,
It was more about, well, why aren't people just letting me get on with it? Why are they constantly saying things, and why have they got strong opinions which seem to affect me?
yeah.
Uh, so that was the issue that I had.
The charity you're currently with as CEO has offered some support in this from the community wellbeing service funded by the NHS, haven't they? So they've had some kind of disability mental health support that it offers.
Yeah, so it's a new one. My organisation had never really ventured into supporting people with mental health issues, even though I was going through it myself. The NHS found a bit of money to put towards mental health and well-being awareness in the community. So the charity that I run, took advantage of that, and got a couple of posts uh, funded by the NHS to trigger conversations and support people in the early stages of either rehabilitation
Yeah,
or recognizing that they had mental health issues.
yeah,
If you ask me, it wasn't enough funding.
yeah. I was
I
literally was my
think
next question.
it's not. It's a drop in the ocean, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, it looks like they're not going to continue funding it as well, because
I don't
and
know
I
what's
think that's
going on with the services in general at the moment. I mean, obviously, we're fighting to try and get more services for the disability community, but I just think that mental health services in general, since COVID, just seems to be completely broken system.
no,
Like, it's
it's people. I think it's early days. I think the impact of mental health and post-COVID era has yet to come. In another uh, decade or so, that's where we're going to really see how it affected a whole generation.
just to bring it back, obviously, to positive talks and around occupational therapy. I, having an understanding of OT and products and services, didn't really understand truly what a mental health OT did and what their role and how that worked until I needed the services myself. And so it's through lived experience I've learned about that. And I just feel like even in the world of OT itself, it seems like there's a massive divide between disability services and mental health, whereas like a mental health OT, they do their particular role and they work within something, but people move from role to role. But yeah, integration's a massively important thing, I think, to help.
It is. There's not enough of it as well. We're in early territory, and the general election hasn't helped, because now there is uncertainty as to what the future of health and social care is going to look like with a new government coming in. So so it's almost a get out clause for health professionals to say, well, we don't know what we're doing, so we can't fund projects like this yet. What I would really like to see, if you asked me if I was going to be the new health and social care minister, I would say we need to pump a lot of money into therapy, to meet the demands of the next decade.
Yeah.
And
Well, that kind of links quite nicely to with just to get a reference, obviously, about upcoming events and stuff. So you'll be at our Milton Keynes event,
yeah,
Rise, where we've got you confirmed to be on our campaigns panel for mental health services. So the idea behind the campaigns is to try and get policies put in place to make change, and particularly with regards to disability as well as a link with mental health. But like you say, as a start, there just needs to be more funding put in overall. But just from experiences with other people that I speak to that are advocates within disability and mental health, the lack of knowledge and training and stuff like that is quite apparent. So coming back to, obviously at the event, you'll have your books there available for anyone that wants to purchase one. Will you be doing book signing as well?
Oh yeah, that seems to be the norm now. Wherever I go, so I'll have a number of books, and happy to any book signing and short interviews with anybody if they want to do that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the event, and hopefully we can raise awareness of disability, mental health, and the generic woes of disabled people, and get society to understand what it is we're going through, and how we are the drivers to that change, not rather than passengers.
So thank you so much for coming here. But lastly, what I'd just like to find out a little bit about from yourself. Obviously, you're stepping away as CEO for Disability Direct, but you have an exciting new CIC that you're setting up. Is it Poverty to Possibility or something?
The story behind that is, so as we've discussed, I'm a disabled person of South Asian heritage, and I've always, since for the last 30 years, been going back and forth to India, to my father's ancestral village, just to go and see the distant family. And a couple of years ago, I went, and it clicked with me. I don't know why it hadn't clicked with me before, but it clicked with me as to, well, what if my granddad hadn't made that all-important journey to the UK in 1963, and I was born as a disabled person over there? What would my life have been like? And in all honesty, I couldn't answer that question with any positivity, because I've seen how disabled people are over there. They are either hidden, or they are in very, very, what's the right word? Medical institutions, almost, to some extent. Wow. They're not living active lives. So I decided that I'd raised £2,000 or £3,000, almost about £3,000, I think. And I bought about 15 hand bikes and wheelchairs. I can't remember the exact amount. And we gave them out to disabled people who are in poverty. Many of these people were coming out of lockdown and had not left the house for 2 and 3 years, because they were just, there was no mode for them to get out there.
Medical implications that would have as well, not just mental health physically, but yeah, that's shocking.
Exactly. And so it got me thinking. When I got back to the UK, I thought, well, with a couple of £1,000, we made a massive difference to the lives of people who I'm never going to meet again. So I got chatting to a couple of the people that went with me, and we said, well, let's do this on a grander scale next time, and hopefully it grows each year. So this year, for example, we're going again in a couple of months' time. I've just booked the tickets, and there's about 9 of us going. And we're all going. We've raised about £7,000 this time. Wow. So with £7,000, I should be able to buy around 80 to 100 hand bikes and wheelchairs. One of the chaps who we gave a hand bike to, I got a photograph of him a few months later, and he'd attached a little rickshaw to the back of his bike, and he's making a living just pedaling his way around the city. And I thought, isn't that great? Yeah. He's found a way of actually, so that, because they don't have a welfare system over there for disabled people, he just did it himself. And I thought, well, if that's made all the difference, imagine if we could do that on a larger scale. So yeah.
And the cost you're talking, that money goes a long way to a lot of people, doesn't it?
Oh God, yeah, it certainly does. You can buy a hand bike over there for around, I think it's about 80 to 100 pounds. Which over here you're talking about 600-700 quid.
Yeah,
minimum.
At least. Yeah, I was gonna say no more.
so yeah, and if you try to import those bikes over here, it wouldn't work.
Yeah, sure.
They'd be too heavy for people, and they may have different standards in terms of their health and safety. Health and safety doesn't really exist over there as much as it does over here. So they get around it that way. But for me, it was about making sure that they're benefiting from the donation. And in some cases, we made cash donations where people just couldn't afford their medical treatments. Sadly, on that day that we were awarding that last batch of wheelchairs, one of the girls who we were supposed to donate it to, she didn't turn up, and it turned out that she had passed away that morning. And her father was so poor he couldn't cremate his own daughter. The proper old open fire cremations there, and you have to buy the wood, and he couldn't even afford that. So we had a quick whip round between us, and we just said, right, here, go and cremate your daughter, please. It's at least it should be on your mind. But again, it shows you the level of poverty there, and disability is very prevalent where there's poverty in India. So they need the support even more.
Do you have a link or anything that's available yet for anyone, if they're listening, they do want to support?
So I've got a GoFundMe page set up at the moment, and I think we're about 2/3 of the way of the target on that GoFundMe page. Although I've got a donation outside that GoFundMe site.
If you send me the details, I'll put it in the description for anyone that wants to support.
That'd be great if you can do that. Yeah, but we're having. It's one of my little things now, and I want to do now that I'm no longer CEO. I can devote my time to doing more stuff nationally and internationally.
Yeah. That sounds really great. So thank you so much for joining us, and it's been really interesting talking to you about the book, but also interesting to learn about your experiences through obviously reading it. And I would highly recommend it to anyone that has an interest, like you said, into disability, entrepreneurship, somebody's obviously journey, mental health. It kind of covers a whole range of different topics, and it's definitely a page turner for sure. Thank you so much for having us, and I'll see you next at Rise in Milton Keynes.
Well, we said we'd do things a bit differently in this particular podcast. Jade has obviously spent a lot of time with Dr Ammo. There's a lot to tell there, and of course his book promises to be future reading. Details of the book are listed below, so do have a look at that, and we will encourage you to have a read of that, as we do with all the books that we've reviewed so far. Now it's time to come to the final points of our podcast. It has been a little bit strange without Jade here with me today, but we will be reunited again soon. We will certainly be together at the Rise for Disability shows, the next one being in September, of course. Details down below on the screen. It was a real privilege to meet with a practicing occupational therapist for this episode and to review any hot topics relevant to her. We'd love to have the chance to talk to you too if you've got anything you want us to big up. And don't forget, if there's any positive talks you've got about products, about services, about charities, get in touch. We want to share it and to publicise that. In the meantime, I guess it's time to say goodbye. We're always happy to hear from you. Social media listed down below. YouTube listed down below. Please share the podcast. We want as many followers as possible because we believe that occupational therapy has got so much more to offer than many people realise, and it's time for us to do a lot of positive talking about the occupational therapy world. So thank you very much. We will see you on the next podcast. But if you're round and about for any of the Rise for Disability shows, come along, say hello, and we look forward to seeing you there. So, on behalf of Jade and myself, thank you very, very much. And we look forward to joining you on the next Positive Talks podcast. Bye-bye.